They said grief was a quiet country, a place of muted colors and soft edges. But for Elizabeth, grief was a sound. It was the sharp, percussive click of the front door of her sprawling Greenwich home locking behind her, an echo of the 1,000 other times her late husband Richard had turned the key, sealing her inside their gilded cage. Tonight, however, the click sounded different. It sounded like a starting pistol. The ride home from the Onyx had been a study in suffocating silence. Amelia drove, her knuckles white on the leather steering wheel of her German sedan, a car Elizabeth's money had bought. Mark, in the passenger seat, had hummed a tuneless, self-satisfied little melody, occasionally catching Elizabeth's eye in the rearview mirror, a flicker of triumph in his gaze. She had offered them nothing, not a tear, not a protest. She had sat in the back, a perfect porcelain doll of a widow, her hands folded in her lap, her expression as serene and unreadable as a marble statue. They mistook her stillness for defeat. They had no idea it was the calm at the eye of a hurricane, the Onyx. The name itself was an irony, a stone of strength and self-control. The restaurant was a fortress of new money, all dark wood, hushed tones, and lighting so dim it felt conspiratorial. It was the kind of place where men like Mark felt powerful, and women like Amelia felt validated. For Elizabeth, it had been a stage for her public execution. The memory was still seared behind her eyes, brighter than the low-hanging crystal light fixtures. The waiter, a young man with kind, nervous eyes and a wispy, barely-there mustache, had approached their table. He'd smiled at Elizabeth, his pen poised over his notepad. "Good evening, madam. May I get you something to start?" Before Elizabeth could even part her lips, Amelia's hand had landed on her arm. It was a gesture she'd perfected, seemingly gentle, but with the weight of a manacle. The pressure was a message. Behave. Be quiet. Be the role I have written for you. "My mother will have the sea bass," Amelia had announced, her voice a syrupy blend of pity and control that she reserved for staff and her mother. She'd leaned in slightly towards the waiter, a conspiratorial whisper that carried across the table like a gunshot. "She has dementia, you see. It gets terribly confusing for her to order." It was the lie that broke the dam. Not the dementia part. That was the foundation of their entire monstrous little project. It was the word confusing. It was an insult to a mind that had once balanced the ledgers of Richard's complex, shadowy business dealings, a mind that had navigated the treacherous social currents of this town for 50 years, a mind that was now, in this very moment, clearer and sharper than it had been in a decade. The young waiter's face had crumpled in embarrassment for her. He'd nodded quickly, his gaze dropping to the floor, refusing to meet Elizabeth's eyes. He had accepted Amelia's version of reality without question, and in his polite, pitying deference, Elizabeth saw the world Amelia and Mark were building for her, a world where she was invisible, a world where she had no voice, a world where her truth was whatever they said it was. Mark had just sat there, swirling his Merlot, a small, smug smile playing on his lips. He was the architect of this play, but Amelia was his star performer. She was a natural. She had learned from the master, after all. Her father, Richard, had been a virtuoso of psychological warfare. His control had been quieter, a slow, creeping vine that had wrapped around Elizabeth's life until she could no longer remember what it felt like to breathe without his permission. He never raised his voice. He didn't have to. His power was in the subtle rearrangement of her things, to make her question her own memory. It was in the passive-aggressive comments about her friends, her clothes, her opinions, until she had none left that weren't his. It was in the suffocating silence that would descend for days if she displeased him, a silence that was louder than any shout. Amelia hadn't fallen far from the tree. She had simply updated his methods for a new generation. Less silence, more saccharine-sweet concern. Elizabeth had looked at her daughter's face, so perfectly composed, the skin smooth, the makeup immaculate. She saw Richard's certainty in her eyes, the unshakable belief in her own rightness. And in that moment, beneath the polite hum of the Onyx, a lifetime of carefully managed composure, of swallowing insults, of making herself smaller to keep the peace, finally shattered. The performance was over. The war had just begun. Now, standing in the cold, cavernous foyer of her own home, the silence was different. It wasn't Richard's oppressive silence anymore. It was hers. It was a weapon waiting to be aimed. The house itself was a monument to his control. He had chosen every piece of furniture, approved every shade of paint. It was less a home and more a museum of a life she hadn't truly lived. For the first time, she saw it not as her prison, but as her fortress. The enemy believed they already held the castle, but they were about to find out she had controlled the armory all along. She ignored the grand staircase that swept upwards into the darkness and walked down the hall, her sensible heels making no sound on the thick Persian runner, another of Richard's choices. Her destination was the study. His study. Even after his death a year ago, it still smelled of him. Old leather, bay rum aftershave, and the faint, metallic scent of secrets. She didn't turn on the main overhead light, instead switching on a single green-shaded banker's lamp on the massive mahogany desk. The room was cast in shadows and secrets, just as he'd liked it. But the secrets were hers now. She pulled out a tablet from a locked desk drawer. It was a standard, late-model device, the kind Leo, her grandson, was always trying to get her to use for connecting on Facebook or whatever new app was consuming his generation. This tablet had never been on the internet. Its purpose was far more specific. After Richard's accident, the single-car crash on a clear, dry night that the police had ruled a tragic miscalculation, Elizabeth had used a portion of her newfound freedom and a discreet security firm to make some changes to the house. She had learned from the best, after all. Richard had always said, "Information is the only currency that never loses its value." Her fingers, steady and sure, tapped a sequence on the screen. Not an app icon. She tapped the four corners of the screen in a specific order, then drew a small, invisible symbol in the center. The familiar user interface dissolved, replaced by a stark, encrypted login screen. She entered a password, the date of the first time Richard had belittled her in front of their friends, a day she had sworn she would never forget. A grid of black squares appeared on the screen. She touched the third one in the top row. The square flickered to life. The image was grainy, shot from a low angle, but the audio was crystal clear. And she was looking at the interior of Amelia's car, filmed from a tiny camera disguised as a USB charging port. Amelia was still driving, the street lights of Meadow Creek sliding across her tense face. Mark was slouched in his seat, his tie loosened. "Didn't even fight it," Mark was saying, and his laugh was a short, ugly bark. It was the same smug sound she'd heard at the restaurant. She just sat there like a lamb. "I'm telling you, Ames, she's losing it. The lights are on, but nobody's home." "Don't be cruel, Mark," Amelia said, but there was no force behind it. It was a token protest. "It's sad. I hate seeing her like this. I hate seeing our future inheritance being managed by a woman who can't remember what she had for breakfast," he shot back. "Dr. Chen's appointment is Tuesday, 10 a.m., sharp. He's the best in the state. His diagnosis will be unassailable. Once we have that piece of paper, the petition for the conservatorship is a slam dunk. The judge won't even blink. It'll be a mercy, really. We'll find her a lovely place, somewhere with a garden. A garden. A smaller, more tastefully decorated cage." Elizabeth's grip on the tablet tightened. Her knuckles were as white as Amelia's had been on the steering wheel. "And the house?" Amelia asked, her voice softer, almost hesitant. This was the part she found distasteful, not because it was wrong, but because it forced her to confront the grubby mechanics of their plan. "The market in Meadow Creek is still hot, even with the interest rates," Mark said, his voice greasy with excitement. "We sell it. Pay off my partners from that development deal, clear our debts, and set ourselves up for life. Your father would have wanted you to be secure, Amelia. You know he would have." He invoked Richard's name like a blessing, a final seal of approval on their treachery. Elizabeth felt a cold, bitter laugh rise in her throat, but she swallowed it down. Let them think that. Let them believe they were honoring the memory of the man who had taught them both so well how to be cruel. She watched them for another few minutes. They talked about money, about a trip to the Maldives, about a new watch Mark wanted to buy. They didn't mention her again. She was no longer a person to them. She was a problem to be managed, an obstacle to be overcome, a cash machine to be emptied. Elizabeth's face, illuminated by the cold gray light of the tablet, was a mask of stone. A tremor ran through her hand, not of fear or weakness, but of rage so profound it was almost sublime. It was a rage that had been simmering for 30 years, banked and controlled, but never extinguished. Now it was burning away all the fear, all the doubt, all the long-suffering patience. They thought they were hunting a wounded animal, frail and confused. They didn't realize Richard's greatest secret wasn't his money. It was the predator he had created through decades of quiet torment. And she was finally ready to be let out of her cage. She switched off the feed, plunging the study back into near darkness. She sat there for a long time, the silence of the house wrapping around her, not as a shroud, but as a cloak of invisibility. A plan, intricate and cold and beautiful, began to form in her mind, its pieces clicking into place like the tumblers of a lock. The morning sun cut through the sterile white blinds of the living room, striping the floor with light. The house was immaculate, as always. Elizabeth had been up since dawn, not tidying, but preparing. She moved through the rooms with a calm deliberation that felt new. The hesitant shuffle of the past few months, a role she had been rehearsing for Amelia's benefit, was gone. She was sipping her second cup of tea, black, no sugar, when the sound of Amelia's car crunched on the gravel driveway, right on schedule. Elizabeth took a moment to compose her face, letting her shoulders slump just so, letting a vague, placid look settle in her eyes. She placed a half-finished crossword puzzle on the table beside her, a prop to suggest a mind gently fraying at the edges. The doorbell chimed. Elizabeth didn't get up immediately. She waited, counting to 10, before she began her slow, slightly unsteady walk to the door. Amelia stood on the porch, holding a box from the expensive bakery downtown. She was dressed in tailored slacks and a silk blouse, the very picture of a concerned, capable daughter taking charge. Her smile was bright, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were assessing, cataloging. "Mom," she said, her voice pitched with warmth, "I brought croissants. Your favorite." "That's lovely, dear," Elizabeth said, her voice soft and a little thin. "But I've already had my breakfast. I think." She added the last two words with a touch of artful confusion, a slight frown, as if trying to grasp a slippery memory. She saw a flicker of something in Amelia's eyes, a mixture of pity and satisfaction. It was working. "Well, we can have them with tea," Amelia said, bustling past her into the kitchen as if she owned the place, which in her mind she already did. "I can't stay long. I have a million things to do for the Foundation Gala." Elizabeth followed her, taking a seat at the polished oak kitchen table. She watched as Amelia put the kettle on, moving around the space with an effortless familiarity. It was her childhood home, but she moved in it now like a new owner inspecting her property. "I'm glad I caught you," Amelia said, turning from the counter, her expression shifting to one of practiced seriousness. "I wanted to talk to you about Tuesday." Elizabeth looked at her blankly. "Tuesday? Dr. Chen, Mom?" "The appointment we talked about," Amelia said, her patience theatrical. "The geriatric specialist, remember? We're just going to have a little chat to make sure everything is ticking along all right." She tapped her temple with a perfectly manicured finger. "Oh, that," Elizabeth said, looking down at her hands. She let a long moment pass. "I don't know, Amelia. It seems like such a fuss. I feel fine. A little tired, perhaps." "We're just worried about you, Mom," Amelia said, her voice dropping into the gentle, persuasive tone she'd used on the waiter. "Alone in this big house, last night at the restaurant. It was clear you were getting overwhelmed. We just want what's best for you, for your peace of mind, and for ours. Our peace of mind." There it was. The truth, wrapped in the cellophane of concern. Their peace of mind required her to be diagnosed, labeled, and put away. Elizabeth looked up, meeting Amelia's gaze. She allowed a hint of fear to cloud her features. Are you saying there's something wrong with me?" "No, of course not," Amelia said quickly, a little too quickly. "It's just a checkup, a baseline. Dr. Chen is the very best. He's very kind. You'll like him." Elizabeth held the silence for another beat, letting Amelia's anxiety build. She could see her daughter mentally preparing her counter-arguments, the next phase of her gentle coercion. Then, Elizabeth relented. She gave a small, resigned sigh. "All right, dear," she said, her voice watery with feigned reluctance. "If you think it's for the best, I suppose it can't hurt." The relief that washed over Amelia's face was so profound it was almost comical. The tension left her shoulders. Her smile became genuine for the first time that morning. She had won. The difficult part was over. "Oh, good," she said, patting Elizabeth's hand. "That's wonderful, Mom. It's the right thing to do. Mark and I will pick you up at 9:30 on Tuesday." "Don't you worry about a thing." They had a cup of tea. Amelia talked about the gala, about Mark's latest business deal, about her son Leo's disinterest in joining the real world, and his obsession with coding and video games. Elizabeth listened, nodded, and played the part of a docile, slightly confused mother to perfection. The moment she heard Amelia's car disappear down the long driveway, Elizabeth stood up. The transformation was instantaneous. The slump in her shoulders vanished. Her back straightened. The vague, clouded look in her eyes was replaced by a gaze of crystalline clarity and cold purpose. The fragile old woman was gone. She walked from the kitchen, through the silent hall, and stopped in front of the towering grandfather clock that stood sentinel near the study. It had been Richard's prized possession, an 18th-century behemoth of dark wood and gleaming brass. He had loved its precision, its unforgiving regularity. He would stand before it every Sunday, winding it with a special key, a ritual of control. Elizabeth reached up. Her fingers, which had trembled so convincingly just moments before, were now steady as a surgeon's. She didn't touch the winding key. Instead, she gently gripped the long, delicate, minute hand. She twisted it, not forward, but backward. She moved it past the 6, past the 9, stopping it precisely at the 8 bagday. Then she twisted the shorter hour hand, moving it to the 4, 4:40, the exact time of Richard's death as recorded on the police report. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft, satisfying click, a section of the ornate woodwork beside the clock's face sprung open. It was a perfectly seamless hidden compartment, no bigger than a paperback book. A secret he had shown her once, years ago, in a rare moment of what he'd probably considered intimacy. He had used it to store spare keys and a small amount of emergency cash. He had been so proud of its cleverness. He never imagined she would find a better use for it. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was not cash, but a small, vintage-style silver locket. It was an unassuming piece, tarnished with age, the kind of thing one might find in a dusty antique shop. But when Elizabeth lifted it from the compartment, it had a surprising heft. It was heavier than it looked, far heavier. She closed the compartment, the click echoing the one from the night before. She walked back to the kitchen table, the silver locket cold and solid in her palm. It wasn't a piece of jewelry. It was a key. It was a weapon. It was the first move in a game Amelia and Mark didn't even know they were playing. They were focused on Tuesday, on Dr. Chen, on their legal paperwork. They were playing checkers. She was about to play chess. And she was done sacrificing her pawns. The heavy silence of the study was a comfort, a thick blanket woven from dust motes and the scent of old paper. Elizabeth sat not in her usual armchair, but at Richard's imposing mahogany desk, a throne she had never dared to occupy while he was alive. In her palm, the silver locket felt cold, a stark contrast to the warmth of her skin. For decades, it had held a faded, smiling picture of Amelia as a child, a lie, a pretty facade for a hollow thing. With a practiced twist she'd learned from watching him, a movement he thought she never noticed, the locket didn't open. It split. The two halves separated with a soft, metallic click, revealing not a space for a photograph, but a cavity. Nestled inside, gleaming under the desk lamp, was a piece of black plastic no bigger than her pinky nail. A micro-sized, encrypted hard drive. Her breath hitched. For a moment, a wave of the old fear washed over her. The fear of his study, of his secrets, of the man himself. It was a conditioned response, a reflex honed over 50 years of walking on eggshells. She could almost feel his presence, his cold disapproval at her audacity. She closed her eyes, pushing the phantom away. He was gone. The ghost in the house now was her, and she was finally ready to do some haunting, Her movements were deliberate, precise. She moved to the far wall, to an old, hulking console radio from the 1970s. It hadn't played a note in 30 years, a piece of forgotten furniture, but Richard had loved it. He'd tinkered with it, restoring it, he'd said. She ran her hand along the faux wood grain until her fingers found a small, almost invisible seam. She pressed. A section of the front panel popped open, not with a creak, but with the smooth, oiled silence of well-maintained machinery. Inside, where vacuum tubes should have been, was a custom-built computer terminal. A small dark screen, a keyboard, and a single specialized port. The specialized reader. Her marriage had been a prison, yes, but she had been a meticulous student of her jailer's methods. She had watched him, night after night, as he sat here, thinking she was asleep, thinking she was a fool. She had learned the sequence, the pressure, the purpose of this hidden altar. She inserted the microdrive into the port. It slid home with another quiet click. The dark screen flickered to life, not with a welcome message, but with a single stark command line demanding a password. She typed without hesitation. A date. The day his first business partner had died in that unfortunate boating accident. The screen flashed, and then it opened. Richard's secret world bloomed in the dim light of the study. It wasn't a world of family photos or business correspondence. It was a digital ledger of a life lived entirely in the shadows. Cold, hard, and terrifyingly organized. He wasn't just a brilliant accountant. That was the cover story for a life of crime so sophisticated it barely had a name. He was a fixer, a financial cleaner for a private intelligence firm that didn't officially exist. He was the man the powerful called when their money needed to disappear, when their tracks needed to be erased, when their enemies needed to be financially ruined. The screen was filled with files, ledgers of laundered money flowing through a dizzying web of shell corporations and offshore accounts, from Zurich to the Cayman Islands. Untraceable crypto wallets holding fortunes in Bitcoin and Monero, their keys protected by layers of impossible encryption. And then she found the folder that made her blood run cold. It was labeled simply Compromat. Blackmail. Files upon files on powerful figures, politicians, judges, CEOs. Each folder contained a meticulously documented sin. Financial fraud, insider trading, illicit affairs, all laid out with the dispassionate precision of a mortician preparing a body. Richard hadn't just cleaned money. He had collected leverage. He had built an arsenal of secrets, a private library of ruin. And then she saw the name. Vance M. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Mark, her son-in-law. She clicked it open. It was all there. A subfolder for every year, detailing Mark's fraudulent real estate schemes, the ones Richard had supposedly helped him navigate. He hadn't navigated them. He had orchestrated them, using Mark's greed and ambition as a tool. And he had documented every single illegal step. Inflated property appraisals, straw buyers, kickbacks from contractors, bid rigging on municipal projects. Richard had held the strings, and Mark, her arrogant, condescending son-in-law, had been nothing but his puppet. The documents proved that the seed money for Mark's entire empire, the wealth he lorded over Amelia, the wealth they were now trying to steal from her, was built on a foundation of pure fraud, facilitated and recorded by her dead husband. A bitter laugh escaped her lips, a dry, rasping sound in the silent room. Richard had owned him, just like he had owned her. They were all just assets in his portfolio. She felt a surge, not of victory, but of cold, clear purpose. She wasn't going to unleash the whole arsenal. That would be messy, indiscriminate. That was Richard's way. Her way would be different. It would be a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. She navigated through the files, her mind racing. She bypassed the larger, more complex frauds, the ones that would take years to unravel. She was looking for something specific, something clean, undeniable, and perfectly targeted. She found it in a folder dated 2 years ago. A single, self-contained instance of bid rigging on a city development contract. The evidence was irrefutable. Scanned copies of falsified documents, encrypted chat logs between Mark and a city official, and a ledger showing the exact path of the bribe funneled through one of Richard's shell companies. It was a perfect, self-contained narrative of a crime. It wouldn't be enough to bring Mark down completely, not yet, but it would be enough to light a fire that would send his powerful, complicit partners scattering like rats. She took a clean, new thumb drive from a desk drawer, one she had bought in cash from a pharmacy a week ago. With a steady hand, she dragged the single, specific file onto the drive. The progress bar filled in an instant. She ejected the drive, closed the program, and shut down the hidden terminal. The panel clicked back into place, and the radio was once again just an old, forgotten piece of furniture. She slipped the locket back together, the benign face of a smiling child once again hiding the heart of a digital monster. She held the small thumb drive in her hand. It felt heavy, a single drop of poison, ready to be administered. The psychiatrist's office was the exact opposite of her study. It was a minimalist cathedral of glass and steel, with sleek, low-slung furniture in shades of gray and white. It felt sterile, impersonal, designed to make you feel exposed. Amelia had chosen it, of course. She sat beside Elizabeth on a leather sofa that was uncomfortably firm, her hand patting Elizabeth's knee in a gesture that was meant to look like comfort, but felt like possession. "Thank you so much for seeing us on such short notice, Dr. Chen," Amelia began, her voice dripping with practiced concern. Dr. Chen, a man in his late 40s with a calm, observant face, offered a small, professional smile. "Of course. Why don't you tell me what's been on your mind, Amelia?" Amelia launched into her performance. "It's Mom. We're just so worried. Her memory. It's been getting so bad. Just last week, she left the gas stove on all afternoon. If the smoke detector hadn't gone off, I hate to even think about it." Elizabeth remained silent, her expression placid, her hands folded in her lap. "She gets confused," Amelia continued, her voice catching slightly. "She'll call me by her sister's name, and her sister passed away 10 years ago. She misplaces things constantly. Her keys, her purse, important financial documents, and she's become so paranoid. She thinks people are watching the house. She's even talking about the mail being tampered with." Dr. Chen listened patiently, making occasional notes on a tablet. He turned his gaze to Elizabeth. It was a gentle gaze, but it was probing, analytical. "Elizabeth, how have you been feeling lately?" Elizabeth blinked slowly, as if surfacing from a fog. "Feeling?" she repeated softly. "Oh, I suppose I've been a bit tired." She looked around the room, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. "This is a lovely office. Is it on Grand Avenue?" "It's on Elm Street, Mom," Amelia corrected gently, squeezing her knee. "We've been here before, remember?" Elizabeth gave a vague, dismissive wave of her hand. So many new buildings these days. They all look the same. She looked at Dr. Chen. "What was your name again, young man?" "Dr. Chen," he said, his expression unchanging. "Elizabeth, can you tell me your full address?" Elizabeth's brow furrowed. She opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at Amelia with a helpless expression. "Oh, dear, it's the White House with the big oak tree." She trailed off, looking genuinely distressed. "My mind is like a sieve some days." "It's 1424 Willow Creek Drive," Amelia supplied, her voice thick with sorrow. Dr. Chen nodded. "That's all right. It happens. What about your interests, Elizabeth? What do you do to occupy your time?" Here it was, the pivot. Elizabeth's expression shifted, just slightly. A spark of life returned to her eyes. "Oh, I read a great deal, the papers, financial journals mostly. It's fascinating, really, especially the post-crisis regulations. You know," she said, her voice suddenly gaining a focused, academic tone. "I was just reading an analysis of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, and it's remarkable, isn't it? For all its intentions, the structural loopholes regarding executive accountability, particularly in subsidiary reporting, create a rather glaring vulnerability. It's a compliance nightmare waiting to happen for any multinational." A beat of silence. Dr. Chen's pen stopped moving. Amelia stared at her mother, her mask of concern slipping into one of pure bafflement. Dr. Chen recovered quickly. That's a very insightful point, Elizabeth. You have a background in finance? Oh, no, Elizabeth said, waving her hand dismissively, the fog seemingly rolling back in. My late husband. He was the numbers man. I just picked things up, I suppose. It's all just words on a page. He changed tactics. You have a grandson, I believe. Leo? Elizabeth's face lit up with genuine affection. Oh, yes, my Leo. Such a wonderful boy. What is he studying in college? Dr. Chen asked. Her face fell again. The furrows returned to her brow. Oh, goodness. He told me. It's one of those new things with the computers and money. Is it data processing? No, that's not right. She looked lost again, a ship adrift. He's majoring in computer science with a focus on cryptographic security, Amelia said, a note of exasperation creeping into her tone. Ah, yes, crypto, Elizabeth exclaimed, her eyes suddenly sharp and clear again, locking onto Dr. Chen. That's it. Fascinating field. Absolutely chaotic, of course. Most people see the market volatility and think it's just a digital casino, but they're missing the point entirely. The real value isn't in the price of Bitcoin. It's in the underlying utility of decentralized ledger technology. The potential for smart contracts to revolutionize supply chain management alone is staggering. Though, she added, a thoughtful frown on her face. The current lack of a robust regulatory framework and the scalability problem with proof-of-work consensus mechanisms present significant hurdles to mass adoption. It's a classic tech paradox, isn't it? The room was silent again. Dr. Chen stared at Elizabeth, his professional placidity now tinged with something else. Deep, unadulterated intrigue. He looked from the woman who couldn't remember her own address to the woman who had just delivered a university-level analysis of blockchain technology. He looked at Amelia's bewildered face. The pieces didn't fit. At all. This wasn't a simple case of age-related cognitive decline. This was a puzzle. A walking contradiction. He cleared his throat. Well, Elizabeth, it was very good to speak with you. His voice was professionally non-committal. Based on our conversation today, and the concerns Amelia has raised, I think it would be wise to schedule some further cognitive tests. I'm not prepared to offer a diagnosis at this stage. There are inconsistencies I'd like to explore further. Amelia's face tightened. Inconsistencies. That wasn't the word she wanted. She wanted diagnosis. She wanted dementia. Elizabeth, however, looked down at her hands with a vague, pleasant smile, as if she hadn't understood a word. But inside she felt a cool wave of triumph. She hadn't won the war, but she had secured a crucial piece of territory. She had planted a seed of professional doubt, a legal and medical buffer zone that would be invaluable in the fight to come. The doctor didn't think she was crazy. He thought she was a mystery, and a mystery was much, much harder to lock away. A few days later, the phone felt heavy in her hand as she dialed her grandson's number. She carefully pitched her voice, infusing it with a quaver of elderly frustration she knew would pluck at his heartstrings. Leo, darling, it's your grandmother. Hi, Nana. Everything okay? His voice was distracted, the faint sound of keyboard clicking in the background. Oh, it's this new computer, she sighed, a theatrical weariness in her tone. Your mother, bless her heart, insisted I get this sleek, silver thing, but I can't make heads or tails of it. It's been 3 days, and I can't even get my email to work. It keeps asking for a password I don't remember setting. She heard him sigh, a soft puff of air that was a mixture of student-level exhaustion and grandson-level guilt. Did you try the password you use for everything else, Nana? I've tried everything, dear. I think I've broken it. She let a moment of silence hang, pregnant with feigned helplessness. Okay. Look, I have a break between classes this afternoon. I can swing by for an hour. Will you be home around 3? Oh, would you, Leo? You're a lifesaver. An absolute angel. He arrived precisely at 3, smelling of coffee and campus libraries. He gave her a quick hug, and went straight to the new high-end laptop sitting on the kitchen table. It was the same model Amelia used, a detail Elizabeth had ensured. "All right, Nana, let's see the beast," he said, pulling up a chair. As he worked, his fingers flying across the trackpad, Elizabeth hovered, playing the part of the befuddled technophobe. She brought him a glass of iced tea, asked him questions she already knew the answers to, and peered at the screen with a look of intense confusion. "What's that button for? Why is it making that noise?" Leo was patient, explaining things in simple terms as he reset her email password and organized the icons on her desktop. He was just about to close the machine when Elizabeth played her card. "Oh, before you finish, dear," she said, her voice casual. "Your mother gave me this little memory stick. She said it was very important. A family safety app or something, to make sure I don't click on any viruses or scams. She said you would know how to install it." She produced the thumb drive, not the one with Mark's secrets, but another, identical one she had prepared. Leo took it, glancing at it briefly. "A safety app? Mom's getting paranoid." He shrugged. "Probably just some overpriced antivirus software. But sure, I can install it." He plugged the drive into the laptop. A single installation file appeared on the screen, its icon a generic, reassuring green shield. He double-clicked it. A setup wizard popped up with a progress bar and a series of prompts. Leo, focused on the task and eager to get back to his studies, clicked Next, Agree, and Install, without reading a word of the fine print. Elizabeth watched, her heart beating a steady, calm rhythm. She guided him, her voice a gentle murmur. "She said to use the full sync option, dear, so she can help me if I get stuck again." "Right, full sync, got it," Leo mumbled, checking the box. The program installed in under a minute. No dramatic alerts, no suspicious pop-ups. A new, harmless-looking green shield icon appeared in the system tray. "There," Leo said, stretching. "All set. This app will run in the background. And with the sync on, if you have a problem, Mom can probably see your screen from her laptop to help you out." "Oh, you are just the cleverest boy," Elizabeth cooed, patting his arm. "Thank you, my dear. I don't know what I'd do without you." After he left, Elizabeth waited. She waited a full hour, letting the quiet of the house settle around her again. Then she went to her old, reliable desktop computer in the study. She opened a simple, password-protected program. She typed in her credentials, and there it was, mirrored on her screen, in real time, was Amelia's desktop. Everything, her open emails, her browser history, her iMessage conversations with Mark, her calendar appointments. The keylogging software was active, recording every single keystroke. The remote access was flawless. She was a digital ghost in her daughter's machine. The seed of doubt she planted with Dr. Chen was for the public record. This seed, planted by an unsuspecting Leo, was for the truth. The next phase required a different kind of stealth. Not the quiet observation of her own home, but the calculated anonymity of the outside world. She dressed in clothes she hadn't worn in years, a simple coat, a headscarf, and sunglasses, an outfit that made her blend into the background, another nameless older woman running errands. She took a bus to the main branch of the public library downtown, a place she hadn't been to in decades. The smell of old books and floor polish was a comforting cloak of normalcy. She didn't use her library card. She walked past the main computer banks, filled with students and job seekers, and found a quiet, isolated terminal in the reference section. She paid for an hour of internet time with cash. The system was open, public, its Wi-Fi a chaotic sea of anonymous data. Perfect. Her fingers, which had trembled when accepting the court summons, were now rock steady. She opened a private browsing window. She navigated to a service that created temporary, untraceable email addresses, good for only 60 minutes. She created one. Silent. Whistle22@proton.me. Then, she opened another tab and went to Twitter. She didn't have an account, but she had been studying her target for weeks. Ben Carter, a young, hungry journalist for an independent online news outlet. His bio read, "I dig, I write, I expose." His feed was a relentless stream of investigations into corporate malfeasance and political corruption. He was ambitious, and he was looking for his next big story. She found the contact link on his profile. It led to a secure submission form. She took a deep breath. She had purchased a cheap, prepaid burner phone for this single purpose, along with a simple voice masking app. She wouldn't speak to him, not yet. But the app was a necessary layer of precaution. Today, it was all about the digital drop. She began to type the message. The persona she adopted was that of a disgruntled former employee from one of Mark's partner companies, someone with a conscience and an axe to grind. The tone was terse, cryptic, and enticing. Subject: a tip on the Henderson municipal contract. Body: look into Mark Vance and his associates at Sterling Development. Specifically, their bid for the Henderson project 2 years ago. The numbers don't add up because they were never meant to. There are irregularities in the procurement process that a good reporter might find very interesting. I'm attaching a file. It's encrypted, but the password is fair play. A reminder of a concept some people have forgotten. This is all you're getting from me. Don't try to find me. Just follow the money. She attached the file from the thumb drive, the perfect, self-contained narrative of Mark's bid-rigging scheme. She clicked send. The message vanished into the ether. She closed the browser, cleared the history, and logged out. Her temporary email address would self-destruct in 58 minutes. She stood up, walked out of the library, and dropped the burner phone into a trash can 2 blocks away. She never looked back. For 2 days, there was nothing. A deafening silence. Elizabeth went about her routine, a calm surface masking the churning anticipation beneath. She tended her garden. She read her books. She watched Amelia's digital life unfold on her monitor, a stream of brunch plans, social media posts, and increasingly frantic texts to Mark. Then, on the 3rd afternoon, it happened. A single tweet from Ben Carter. Working on a big story. Sometimes the most respectable-looking businesses are hiding the dirtiest secrets. #bid-rigging, #corruption, #follow the money. An hour later, another. Sources confirm financial irregularities in the Henderson municipal contract. Key players include Sterling Development. Story dropping soon. The fire had been lit. That evening, the article was published. It was a bombshell. Carter had done his job well. He'd used the file she'd sent as a starting point, corroborating the information with public records and anonymous sources he'd cultivated. The piece laid out the bid-rigging scheme in damning detail, naming Mark's primary business associate, but only mentioning Mark himself as a person of interest. It was a masterpiece of controlled demolition. She hadn't targeted Mark directly. She had set his world on fire. The news erupted online. The article was shared hundreds, then thousands of times. The names of Mark's partners were trending. Their company's stock began to dip in after-hours trading. The message had been sent, loud and clear, not to the world, but to a very specific group of powerful, guilty men. I know what you did, and I have more. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Through her hidden window into Amelia's life, Elizabeth watched the chaos unfold. A frantic phone call from Mark, his voice a low, panicked snarl. "Did you see it? Did you see the article?" "Of course I saw it, Mark. My phone hasn't stopped buzzing. What the hell happened?" "I don't know. It's that bastard Henderson. He must have talked. Or maybe a rival. Someone we outbid. This is a targeted hit. Can they trace it to you?" Amelia's voice was sharp with fear. No, not directly, not from this. But the partners are spooked. They're calling me, screaming. The whole deal is about to implode. This is a disaster." Elizabeth listened, a grim satisfaction settling over her. They were rattled, terrified, and in their panic, they made the exact mistake she had counted on. They attributed the leak to bad luck, to a business rival, to anything but the frail old woman they were so desperate to institutionalize. It never occurred to them to look at their victim. "We have to move faster," Mark said, his voice hard. This is a sign. Our window is closing. If my finances get tied up in some public investigation, everything gets more complicated. We need to secure your mother's assets now, before this gets any worse." "You mean the conservatorship," Amelia said, her voice dropping. "I mean the conservatorship," he confirmed. "Call the lawyer. Tell him to file. Tell him to push for an emergency hearing. Use the doctor's report. Use the stove incident. Use whatever you have to. We are doing this, and we are doing it this week." 3 days later, a man in a cheap suit stood on her doorstep. a process server. He handed her a thick, formal envelope. "Elizabeth Sterling?" he asked, his voice flat. She looked at him, her eyes wide with carefully rehearsed confusion. "Yes?" "You've been served," he said, gesturing to the envelope. She took it. Her hand trembled, a delicate, believable tremor that she had practiced in the mirror. She looked at the official seal of the Superior Court, then back at the man, her face a mask of dawning horror. I don't understand," she whispered, her voice cracking. He just shrugged, turned, and walked back to his car. Elizabeth closed the door. The moment the lock clicked shut, the trembling stopped. Her hand was steady. Her expression was cold, hard, and utterly focused. She walked to the kitchen table and laid the documents down. A formal petition for an emergency conservatorship. It cited her erratic behavior, her financial incompetence, and referenced Dr. Chen's non-conclusive but concerning report as evidence of her deteriorating mental state. A court date was set for the following week. They had done it. They had walked right into the center of the board. In their greed and their panic, they had initiated the very legal battle that would serve as the stage for their own destruction. She looked down at the papers, at their signatures, at their lies. A slow, chilling smile spread across her face. The chessboard was set, the trap was sprung, and the queen was ready to make her next move. The keylogger was a window into their souls. Through the faint, almost imperceptible glow of her monitor in the darkened study, Elizabeth watched them. She saw every frantic search, every anxious glance at her bank statements. Amelia and Mark, circling her finances like vultures, just waiting for her to make a mistake. They were looking for ammunition. Fine, she thought, a cold resolve hardening in her chest. She would give them a cannon. Her fingers, which they believed to be stiff and clumsy with age, moved over the keyboard with a dancer's grace. She didn't navigate to her usual online retailers, the ones they monitored so closely. Instead, she typed a URL she had memorized years ago, an address Richard had once let slip in a moment of drunken arrogance. The site was obscure, minimalist, designed to be overlooked. It purported to be an importer of rare botanical specimens from Southeast Asia. Elizabeth knew it for what it was, a digital dead drop, a service catalog for problems that needed to be solved quietly. She scrolled past listings for mundane but overpriced plants until she found it, Phalaenopsis, Celestial Empress. The picture showed a single, perfect bloom, its petals the color of a twilight sky, impossibly delicate. The price was obscene, $75,000, a sum so absurd, so clearly indicative of a mind unmoored from reality, that it was perfect. To Amelia and Mark, it would be the grand finale of her descent into madness, the irrefutable proof of her senile extravagance, the silver bullet for their legal battle. She clicked Add to Cart. She proceeded to checkout. Her heart didn't race. Her hands didn't shake. There was only a profound and unsettling calm. She entered her credit card information with slow, deliberate keystrokes, as if she were a befuddled old woman struggling with the modern world. The confirmation page loaded. Transaction approved. She could almost feel the vibration of their victory across the city. Amelia would be crowing, showing the receipt to Mark on her phone. "We've got her, Mark. It's over. The judge will have to listen now." They would see a confused old woman wasting a fortune she no longer understood. But Elizabeth saw something else. She saw a signal, a coded message, rocketing across the globe. The name of the orchid, Celestial Empress, was a designation. The price, $75,000, was not a payment for goods. It was a retainer, half now, half upon completion. The transaction was not a purchase. It was a command. In a quiet office in a city she couldn't name, a man named Silas, a discreet and ruthlessly efficient operative from Richard's shadowy world, would see the alert. He would check the details against a ledger only he understood, and he would know his services had been engaged. The game had a new player, one Amelia and Mark had never even conceived of. Elizabeth closed the laptop, the darkness of the study wrapping around her like a comforting shroud. The trap was set. Now, All she had to do was wait for them to walk into it. The family court was designed to be devoid of emotion. The wood was pale, the walls were a sterile off-white. The air hummed with the quiet, impersonal sound of institutional air conditioning. It was a place for facts and figures, for the cold dissection of broken lives. Elizabeth sat at the petitioner's table, looking exactly as they wanted her to look. Small, frail, swallowed by a simple gray dress that seemed a size too big. Her hands, wrinkled and spotted, were folded in her lap. Her gaze was fixed on a point somewhere on the table's surface, her expression placid, almost vacant. She was the very picture of pathetic vulnerability. Mark's lawyer, a man named Peterson, with a shark smile and eyes that appraised everything in dollar signs, was at the lectern. He spoke in a tone of deep, practiced regret, as if this whole proceeding pained him personally. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth and sympathetic, "my clients, Amelia and Mark Croft, are here today not out of greed or malice, but out of profound love and concern for Amelia's mother, Mrs. Elizabeth Vance." He paced slowly, his polished shoes making no sound on the floor. "We have submitted documents detailing a pattern of increasingly erratic behavior, a withdrawal of $50,000 in cash, which Mrs. Vance cannot account for, a series of confused and contradictory online orders for items she has no use for, and then this." He gestured to the large screen mounted on the wall. A digital receipt appeared, the numbers stark and damning. $75,000, Your Honor. For an orchid, a single flower. This is not the action of a woman in command of her faculties. This is not sound financial management. This, Your Honor, is a cry for help. The judge, a woman named Davies with weary eyes that had seen too many family tragedies, looked from the screen to Elizabeth. Her expression softened with pity. Then Amelia was called to the stand. She moved with a tragic, fragile grace, dabbing at her eyes with a lace-trimmed handkerchief. She swore her oath, her voice a trembling whisper. "Miss Croft," Peterson began gently, "can you please tell the court why you feel it's necessary to seek guardianship over your mother?" Amelia took a shuddering breath. The performance began. "I love my mother more than anything in the world," she said, tears already welling. This is the hardest thing I've ever had to do." She looked at Elizabeth, her face a mask of sorrow. "But she's not the woman she once was. She was so brilliant, so strong. And now," her voice broke, "she gets lost in her own home. She forgets names, important dates. Last week, she looked right at my husband, Mark, the man she's known for 20 years, and asked him who he was. She accused him of terrible things, horrible paranoid fantasies. It's like her mind is poisoning itself." The lie was so smooth, so well rehearsed. Elizabeth felt a flicker of something that might have been admiration for the sheer audacity of it. Amelia pointed a trembling finger toward the screen. "And then, the orchid. When I saw that, my heart it broke. It's not about the money. It's what it represents. She doesn't understand what she's doing. She's vulnerable. Anyone could take advantage of her. She needs our help, Your Honor." She finally let the sobs come, her shoulders shaking. "She needs to be protected from herself. Please. All we want is to keep her safe." Mark, playing the part of the supportive husband, rushed to the stand and put a comforting arm around her, guiding her back to her seat as she wept into his shoulder. It was a perfect, heart-wrenching tableau of filial devotion. Judge Davies's gaze on Elizabeth was now swimming with compassion. The case seemed open and shut, a clear, tragic, and unfortunately common story of age and decline. The room was heavy with the certainty of Elizabeth's defeat. Through it all, Elizabeth remained perfectly still. She didn't look at Amelia. She didn't look at the judge. She just stared at her hands, letting their narrative solidify, letting the weight of their lies settle over the room, letting them build their own gallows piece by careful piece. She waited. "Based on the evidence presented," Judge Davies began, her voice gentle, and the clearly heartfelt testimony of her daughter, this court is inclined to grant the temporary emergency guardianship requested by. A flicker. The judge paused, annoyed by the interruption. On the large presentation screen, the image of the orchid receipt wavered, then vanished. For a second, the screen was black. Then, it flooded with the bright, familiar blue and white of a cell phone's messaging app. In the back row of the courtroom gallery, Leo sat with his laptop open. His face was pale, his expression grim. He had found the spyware days ago. His first instinct was a hot surge of anger and betrayal. He was going to confront his grandmother, then tell his parents, expose her bizarre, paranoid behavior. But something stopped him, a sliver of doubt. He decided to just listen. For one day, what he heard had curdled his blood. He'd listened to their unfiltered conversations, the casual cruelty, the undisguised greed. He heard them mock the woman he loved. He heard them planning the logistics of selling her home, her furniture, her memories, while she was warehoused in what they called a luxury care facility. His loyalty hadn't just shifted. It had been atomized, then reforged into a cold, hard weapon. He had found a vulnerability in the courtroom's public Wi-Fi network, a simple backdoor that a first-year cybersecurity student could exploit. He typed the final command and hit enter. Projected in massive letters for the entire room to see was a text message thread. The name at the top read, Amelia. The first message, time-stamped from the previous evening. The old bitch is tougher than I thought. We need to push the judge. Lay on the tears. A reply from Metaikar Mark. Don't worry, it's in the bag. Peterson says the orchid was the clincher. Once she's in the home, we liquidate everything. The house alone is worth 8 figures. I'll finally be free of her father's shadow. A wave of gasps and shocked murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The court reporter's fingers froze mid-type. Peterson, the lawyer, stared at the screen, his mouth hanging open, his face slack with disbelief. Another message from Amelia appeared, this one from just an hour before the hearing. Just get it done. I can't stand looking at her anymore. Every time I see her, I see him. Amelia's face, a moment ago a carefully constructed mask of grief, was now a ghastly, bloodless white. She looked at the screen, then at her phone on the table in front of her, as if it had physically betrayed her. Mark looked like he'd been kicked in the stomach, all the air forced from his lungs. The judge's face was a storm front. The pity was gone, burned away by a sudden, glacial fury. Her eyes, no longer weary, were now chips of ice. She turned her head slowly, her gaze moving from the damning words on the screen to the frozen faces of Amelia and Mark. The silence in the room was now absolute, a ringing, terrible void. Into that void, a single, soft sound, the scrape of a chair. Elizabeth rose. She didn't rise like an old woman. She rose like a queen ascending her throne. Her back, which had been stooped in manufactured frailty, was now ramrod straight. Her chin was lifted. When she spoke, her voice was not the reedy, confused whisper they had so carefully described to the court. It was a voice of polished steel, cold, clear, and powerful. It cut through the shocked silence like a surgeon's scalpel. "My daughter," she began, her eyes locking onto Amelia's, pinning her in place, "is not concerned for my health. She is concerned about an inheritance she believes is her birthright. An inheritance she thinks my husband left for me." Her fingers went to her throat, and with a practiced flick of her thumb, she unclasped the silver locket. It swung gently from its chain as she held it up, catching the light. But the real inheritance wasn't money. It was never about the money. She paused, letting the weight of her words fill the room. It was this. It was his secrets. Her gaze swept the room, past the stunned faces in the gallery, and settled on a man in a rumpled suit standing near the doors. He had slipped in unnoticed during Amelia's testimony. "Detective Miller," she said, her voice ringing with an authority that stunned everyone. "I believe you received an anonymous tip about this hearing. From a concerned party?" The detective, his face a mask of professional neutrality, gave a single, slow nod. His eyes never left Elizabeth. Silas had been punctual. The authorities were present. The board was set. "My husband, Richard Vance," Elizabeth continued, her voice never wavering, her gaze now a physical force directed at Mark, was not just a successful accountant. He was a financial cleaner for some very powerful, very dangerous people. He made problems, evidence, and sometimes people disappear. And my son-in-law, Mark, she said his name as if it were something foul, was not just his protégé. He was a willing and often eager accomplice in Richard's criminal enterprise. Mark lunged to his feet, his face purple with rage and panic. "That's a lie! She's insane! You see, Your Honor, this proves it! She's delusional!" "Mr. Croft, sit down!" Judge Davies thundered, banging her gavel so hard the sound cracked like a gunshot. "Mr. Peterson, control your client or I will have him removed in handcuffs." Peterson, pale and sweating, tugged uselessly at Mark's sleeve. Elizabeth waited, a portrait of unnerving calm, until the commotion subsided. Then she turned her full, undivided attention to her daughter. Amelia was paralyzed, trapped in the spotlight of her mother's gaze, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her in real time. Elizabeth's voice dropped, becoming quieter, more intimate, and 1,000 times more lethal. It was a voice meant only for Amelia, though the entire room strained to hear it. "The real sickness in this family wasn't in my mind, Amelia." She took a single step forward. "It was in your silence. It was in all the years you watched him hurt me, and you said nothing. You saw the bruises I tried to hide with makeup. You heard me crying in my room after he was done with his discipline. You knew what he was." Elizabeth's eyes bore into her daughter's, stripping away every lie, every self-deception, every last defense. "You weren't angry that he was a monster," she whispered, the words landing with the devastating force of a final, soul-destroying truth. "You were just angry that I was the one who finally put him down." The implication, a confession wrapped in an accusation, hung in the silent, supercharged air. It was the final secret, laid bare not for the court, not for the detective, but as a poisoned dart aimed directly at the heart of her daughter. Amelia made a sound. It wasn't a word. It wasn't a cry. It was a raw, guttural noise of a soul being ripped apart, the sound of a life built on a lie hitting bedrock. The gilded cage had shattered, and the woman who had been its prisoner was finally, terrifyingly, free. The judge's gavel was a frantic, useless sound, a piece of wood trying to beat back a tsunami of digital noise and human shock. The projected images of Amelia's and Mark's text messages hung in the air like a ghost, an undeniable testament to their venom. Gasps echoed off the wood-paneled walls. A reporter in the back row was already muttering into his phone, his voice a low, urgent hum. "Get me a live feed now. I don't care how. The Vance case just exploded. No, I'm not kidding. It's a bloodbath." Amelia's face was a mask of chalky white, her eyes darting from the screen to the judge, to her mother, then back to the screen, as if hoping to unsee the words she herself had typed. That's taken out of context. They're fake. He hacked us," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at her own son. Leo didn't flinch. He just stood there, his laptop still open, a silent executioner. Mark was different. The color drained from his face not in a wave of shock, but in the slow, sickening realization of total ruin. He saw it all in that one instant: the partners, the investors, the federal contracts, the meticulously constructed facade of his life turning to ash. His lawyer was at his side, whispering frantically, but Mark wasn't listening. He was staring at Elizabeth, at the old woman who was supposed to be a doddering fool, a footnote in his triumphant story. Her expression was placid, almost serene. It was the look of a chess master watching the final, inevitable checkmate. The courtroom doors at the back burst open. It wasn't the local bailiffs. These men wore dark suits, their movements crisp, their faces devoid of emotion. They didn't look at the judge or the lawyers. They scanned the room with an unnerving focus, their eyes finally landing on Mark, then Amelia. An older man with graying temples stepped forward, flashing a badge to the stunned bailiff. "FBI," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Mr. Mark Jennings, Ms. Amelia Vance, you're both under arrest." Amelia let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. "Arrest? For what? For caring about my mother?" The agent didn't even blink. Conspiracy to commit fraud, for starters. We'll have a longer conversation about money laundering and obstruction of justice once you're downtown. He gestured, and 2 other agents moved forward with practiced efficiency. The clicks of the handcuffs were like gunshots in the suddenly silent room. Mark didn't resist. He just stood there, a hollowed-out man in an expensive suit. But Amelia fought. She twisted, pulling against the agent's grip. "You can't do this. My mother is mentally incompetent. She doesn't know what she's doing. Ask her. Ask her anything." The lead agent finally turned his gaze to Elizabeth. He walked over to her witness stand, his presence a shield against the swirling storm. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, "my name is Special Agent Coulson. We're going to need your help to understand the full scope of this." He gestured back toward the hard drive sitting on the evidence table. "And that little piece of jewelry." Elizabeth met his eyes. For the first time, she wasn't a victim being assessed, but a resource being consulted. "I believe," she said, her voice clear and steady, "that it contains everything you'll need, and much, much more." The transfer to protective custody was swift. She was escorted out a side door, away from the flashbulbs and shouted questions that erupted as Mark and Amelia were led out the front. The media frenzy was instantaneous. By nightfall, Vance family was trending on every social platform. News vans were camped outside the courthouse, outside the family mansion, outside Mark's now shuttered office. His face, once the picture of corporate success on business magazines, was now a grim mugshot on every major news network. The story was too perfect. A wealthy family, a vulnerable matriarch, a greedy plot, and a surprise twist of a hidden criminal empire. It was a house of cards, and Leo hadn't just pulled one card out. He'd kicked the legs out from under the table. In the sterile quiet of a government-provided apartment, Elizabeth watched the news. She saw financial analysts on TV dissecting the collapse of Mark's investment firm. She read articles online detailing the network of shell corporations and offshore accounts now being unraveled by federal investigators. It all felt strangely distant, like watching a movie about someone else's life. The empire Richard had built, the one Mark had tried to hijack, was being dismantled piece by piece. The name Vance, once a symbol of quiet, suburban affluence, was now synonymous with scandal. It was a brutal, public execution of a family legacy built on cruelty and lies, and Elizabeth felt nothing but a profound, hollowed-out sense of peace. The cage was gone, but she wasn't yet free. She was just somewhere in between, a witness, a key, a ghost in the federal machine. A few weeks later, the media storm had moved on to its next victim, leaving the wreckage of the Vance family smoldering in its wake. The air in the small, bright cafe was filled with the scent of coffee beans and the low murmur of conversations. It was a place of deliberate anonymity, chosen for its lack of character, its simple tables and clean windows looking out onto a street that held no memories. Elizabeth sat opposite Leo, a cup of untouched tea cooling in front of her. The space between them was not one of awkwardness, but of profound, unspoken weight. He had saved her. He had also damned his own parents. "They won't let me see them," Leo said quietly, stirring his coffee. "The lawyers, I mean. They say I'm a hostile party." "Are you?" Elizabeth asked, her voice soft. Leo looked up, his young face etched with a conflict that aged him beyond his years. "I don't know what I am." "When I was in that courtroom, listening to them talk about you, about putting you away, all I could think about was every time I saw them dismiss you. Every holiday you'd try to tell a story and Mom would just talk over you. Every time Dad would get that look on his face when you'd ask a question about the finances, like you were a child." He shook his head, looking down into his cup. "I thought it was just how they were. I didn't see it. Not really. Not until I read those messages." "It's hard to see the walls of a prison when you're born inside it," Elizabeth said. He met her eyes, a question burning in them. "How did you live with it for so long? With him? Grandfather? I barely remember him. Just that he was loud, and the house was always quiet when he was home." This was it. The moment she had both dreaded and craved. The final confession. the truth that would either cement their bond or shatter it forever. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea. It was lukewarm. "Your grandfather, Leo," she began, her voice a low, steady current. "He wasn't just a loud man, he was a meticulous man. He believed that control was the only thing that mattered. Control over his business, his money, his house, his wife." She told him everything. Not in a rush, but in a slow, painful unwrapping of the past 50 years. She spoke of Richard's early charm, the way it had slowly curdled into possessiveness. She described the rules of the house, no friends over without his approval, her clothes chosen and laid out for her each morning, her phone calls monitored, her opinions on any subject, from politics to the color of the drapes, treated as the foolish ramblings of an inferior mind. "He never hit me," she said, her gaze fixed on a crack in the ceramic of her cup. "Not in a way that would leave a bruise for the world to see. His violence was quieter. He would dismantle me piece by piece with words. He would tell me I was stupid until I believed it. He would isolate me from my friends until I had none left. He would praise Amelia for being sharp and ruthless, just like him, and then turn to me and ask why I couldn't even balance a checkbook. He made me a ghost in my own home." She described Amelia's role in it, the silent complicity, the daughter who saw her mother shrinking, fading, and chose to side with the power, with the abuser. "She saw it, Leo. She was a teenager when he locked me in the bedroom for an entire day because I'd overdrawn the grocery account by $5. She heard me crying. She slid a glass of water under the door when he wasn't looking, but she never, ever spoke up. She learned her lesson early. Stay on the right side of the monster." Leo's face was a canvas of dawning horror. This was not the family history he knew. It was a dark, twisted version that made a sickening amount of sense. "The hard drive," Elizabeth continued, her voice dropping even lower, drawing him in. "That was his life's work, his leverage, but his greatest paranoia was his car. He bought the most advanced, most secure vehicle on the market. It was a fortress on wheels. He was terrified of being hacked, of someone taking control. So he studied it. He had manuals, technical schematics, online tutorials. He made me study them too." "Why?" Leo whispered. "He said that in an emergency, I needed to know the car's systems as well as he did, in case he was incapacitated. What he was really doing was reinforcing his control, making me learn the intricacies of my own cage. I had to know every circuit, every wireless protocol, every failsafe. I had to be able to describe the function of the steering assist module's primary actuator." She paused, taking a deep breath. She looked out the window at the anonymous people walking by, living their simple, unknowable lives. "A year before he died," she said, turning her gaze back to Leo, "he was on a trip. I found out he had a new life insurance policy, a massive one, and he had been making inquiries with his lawyer about updating his will to give Mark full control of the estate, with me as a dependent. Not a beneficiary. A dependent, like a pet. That's when I knew my time was running out. He wasn't just going to let me grow old. He was going to erase me completely." Leo's hands were clenched into white-knuckled fists on the table. "So you took the hard drive." "That was the first step," Elizabeth said. "But it wasn't enough. As long as he was alive, I was his property. There was no escape, no divorce. He would have ruined me, proven me incompetent, just as Amelia and Mark tried to do. He would have hunted me down. There was only one way out." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. The cafe around them seemed to fade away, the sounds muffled, the light dimming until it was just the two of them, suspended in the terrible gravity of her next words. "His death was not an accident, Leo. It was a single car crash on a treacherous road, a sharp turn on the Old Ridge Highway during a storm. The official report said it was driver error, compounded by the wet conditions. They were wrong." Leo just stared, his mouth slightly agape. He didn't speak. He couldn't. "From his own manuals," Elizabeth said, her voice a flat, clinical whisper, "I learned that the car's steering assist could be temporarily disabled through a remote Bluetooth command. if you had the right administrative access codes, a command meant for diagnostics. It would last for only 5 seconds before the system rebooted. 5 seconds is all it takes on a corner like that. Especially when you're driving too fast, convinced you're invincible. She sat back, the confession hanging in the air between them, a monstrous, living thing. I was a mile away, parked in the woods with a laptop. I tracked his car's GPS just as he had taught me to do. I waited for the precise moment, the turn, the speed, the rain, and I sent the command. It was my one act of violent rebellion, my one and only move for survival. It wasn't a confession of guilt I gave the police. It was a statement of fact. He was gone. The silence stretched. Leo's face was pale, his eyes wide with a universe of shock, revulsion, and a dawning, terrible understanding. He looked at his grandmother, this quiet, frail woman who had just confessed to a perfect, untraceable murder. He thought of his grandfather, the loud, booming figure from his childhood memories. He thought of his parents, their casual cruelty, their greed. He saw the long, unbroken line of abuse passed down from father to daughter, and he saw the woman who had finally, violently, broken the chain. He didn't know what to feel. The act was monstrous. The reason, he understood the reason. He saw the cornered animal, left with no other way out. It was not a choice between right and wrong. It was a choice between her life and Richard's. Slowly, deliberately, he unclenched his fists. He reached across the table, his warm young hand covering her cool, wrinkled one. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. In that single, simple gesture, he gave her the one thing she had never received from her own child: absolution. He didn't condone it, but he understood, and he would not let her be alone with it. The deal with the federal government was cold, clean, and transactional. In exchange for her complete, unfettered testimony against the half-dozen powerful men caught in the web of Richard's compromat files, Elizabeth Vance would be granted full immunity for any potential financial crimes she might have been party to, and more importantly, a permanent closing of the file on Richard Vance's accidental death. She was more valuable to them as a witness than as a criminal. She held the keys to a much larger kingdom of rot, and they wanted it. She spent weeks in depositions, a ghost recounting the sins of other ghosts, her memory, once deemed faulty, now proving to be a razor-sharp weapon. The day the final papers were signed, she walked out of the federal building into the bright afternoon sun. Her first call was to a real estate agent. "Sell the house," she said, her voice leaving no room for negotiation. "I don't care about the price. I want it gone." She sold everything. The furniture that held the imprints of silent dinners. The art Richard had bought as an investment, the cars, the jewelry. She liquidated every clean asset, everything untouched by Richard's criminal enterprise, and watched the life she had known be converted into a sterile digital number in a bank account. Her last meeting with Leo took place not in a cafe, but on a bench in a quiet park. She handed him a thick folder. "This is for you," she said. He opened it. It was the paperwork for an untouchable trust fund. The amount was staggering. It was structured to be inaccessible to anyone but him, walled off from the legal and financial fallout that would follow his parents for years to come. "I can't take this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is blood money." "No," Elizabeth said firmly, looking him in the eye. "His money was blood money. This is my money. This is what's left after a lifetime of unpaid labor. It's your start. A clean one." "There's only one condition." "What is it?" "Don't become him," she said, her voice fierce. "Don't ever let power make you cruel. And don't become her. Don't ever let fear make you silent. Just be you, Leo, the boy who hacked a courtroom to save his grandmother. Be that person." He pulled her into a hug, burying his face in her shoulder. It was the first time they had hugged since he was a small child. "What will you do now?" he asked, his voice muffled. "My work is done," she said, patting his back. "It's time for me to disappear." That night, she made one final call, not on a traceable cell phone, but on a burn phone she'd been given. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, the same voice that had confirmed the Orchid transaction an eternity ago. Silas, she said. Elizabeth, he replied. I assume the accounts are settled. They are, she said. Now it's time for the final service. The one Richard always planned for himself, in case the world came crashing down. The Phoenix Protocol, Silas said, a hint of professional appreciation in his tone. A complete erasure. New identity, new life, no trail. It's expensive. I have the funds, Elizabeth said. I want to be a ghost. It can be arranged. Where will the ghost be flying to? Elizabeth looked out her hotel window at the city lights, a constellation of lives she would soon be leaving behind forever. Somewhere warm, she said. And nowhere he ever went. The final scene is not one of drama, but of quiet release. A woman sits in the business-class cabin of a 787, the gentle hum of the engines, a lullaby of escape. She looks like Elizabeth Vance, the same silver hair, the same intelligent eyes. But she is also someone entirely new. Her posture is different, relaxed, no longer braced for an invisible blow. The clothes she wears are simple, comfortable, chosen by her and for her. She holds a passport with a name that is not her own, a history that is a fiction, and a future that is a blank page. She looks out the window as the plane banks over the ocean, the first rays of sunrise streaking the horizon with pink and gold. For over 50 years, she had been defined by her relationships to others. Richard's wife, Amelia's mother, Mark's target, a victim, a witness. Now, she is none of those things. She is a passenger, on a flight to an unnamed destination. She is simply her. As the sun breaks free from the edge of the world, bathing the cabin in a warm, golden light, a small, genuine smile touches her lips. It is not a smile of triumph or revenge. It is the smile of a prisoner who has just walked out into the sun for the first time. The smile of a woman who is, at long last, free.